It's rare that a CIA case officer steps out of the shadows to talk about his work, but in an exclusive interview with NBC News, a former CIA field operative speaks out about his time overseas, and more specifically about U.S. plans never carried out to overthrow Syria's Bashar al-Assad. He sat down with our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel.
Spring 2012. Amateur video appears to show a Syrian government attack on civilians in a village called Hula. Witnesses say it was part of a massacre to crush what was then a growing rebel uprising. The regime denied responsibility. A young CIA operative, Douglas Laux, had recently arrived in the region after 2 tours tracking insurgents in Afghanistan. His boss had just told him his new assignment was to find out more about the Syrian rebels.
He taps you and tells you your mission in Syria is what?
He says, look, you're going to be my eyes and ears. You know, I want to know what's going on.
In a new book redacted by the CIA before its release next week, Laux says the goal in Syria was clear: find covert ways to back the rebels and remove President Bashar al-Assad. Laux says he made detailed recommendations.
I was saying, hey, here's a possible solution. What if we try this? What if we try this?
Although a version of Laux's plan to arm rebels was publicly supported by senior officials in the Obama administration at the time, it was never implemented. The administration sent some weapons, but moderate Syrian rebels known as the Free Syrian Army collapsed, and ISIS carved out a terrorist enclave. Critics say it was one of President Obama's biggest foreign policy mistakes.
I'm confident we would be looking at a different Syria today if the President of the United States had not overruled David Petraeus, then head of the CIA, Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, and Leon Panetta, who was then Secretary of Defense, who all unanimously recommended arming and training the Free Syrian Army.
But would have arming the rebels early on stopped the birth of ISIS? Interestingly, Laux doesn't think so.
So what about the argument if more had been done to help the rebels, help people like through the CIA or military help? If more had been done back then, there'd be no Paris, there'd be no Brussels, there'd be no ISIS.
No, I think that's impossible to predict, and I think that's impossible to say. I think that ISIS was brewing regardless.
Laux resigned from the CIA in frustration. He says his intention isn't to be a whistleblower, but merely to describe what it was like to be a CIA case officer in wartime.
Isn't part of the CIA, isn't the mantra that you sign up and say, I'm not going to tell my war stories?
A lot of my colleagues are upset with me, and I mean, livid with me about it.
It's a ground-level look at how the CIA operated during the so-called global war on terrorism, and a view many at the agency wish was left unseen. Richard Engel, NBC News, New York.